So Revolver Magazine posted an article sometime back on what they think are the 25 essential thrash metal albums. And since I was knee-deep into the thrash during the classic era, I'll be reacting to this article in full, making corrections, suggesting alternatives, and generally making a nuisance of myself. So, let's get to it. All right, so 25 essential thrash albums according to Revolver Magazine. Technically, the Revolver staff and Martin Popoff. This is from a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, but why not anyways? From Anthrax to Voivod, that's kind of interesting. I mean, what, no Zoetrope, I guess. Anyways, Slayer, of course. Rest in peace, Mr. Hanneman there. So let's begin the list. I'm just going to go through it here. Start off with some Anthrax and Among the Living. Killer album. I would probably largely agree with this choice. Some folks might go Fistful of Metal, but that's more of a heavy metal album that has a lot of speed and some other stuff going on in it. I actually think that Among the Living is really where their thrash creds really start to happen in full gear. I think Spreading Disease gets us there a little bit, but then you have songs like Medusa and whatnot that are a little more heavy metal. Let's just say here, Charlie Benashi's insane drumming speed and all of that. Dan Smith's hardcore inflected guitar work. All right, sure, why not? Caught in the Mosh. Everyone knows my favorite Anthrax song if you saw my top 10 Anthrax songs video. So I can't complain about that choice either for the video that they put in here. Island 1987 is correct. I am going to go through the labels here. They won't always be original labels. I'm going to mention that, of course. This is Revolver Magazine too, and I'll admit a little bit of a bias against Revolver, because I feel like a lot of sites like this and Pitchfork and a bunch of others, they have a real hipster approach to heavy metal and metal in general that I'm not always agreeing with. Some of that might come out here, we'll find out. But yeah, so anyways, Anthrax, Among the Living, excellent choice. Again, I think some people are going to maybe prefer Spreading the Disease. I think that's a record. I don't think people are going to go State of Euphoria much for this one. I'm not a big fan of State of Euphoria, as a lot of you know. I like the band. I do feel it was rushed. And I'm also not really big on the lyrics on a lot of the songs. I mean, Who Cares Wins is a stupid song title. Let's be honest here. But yeah, Anthrax, Among the Living. I'm totally on board with that. Yeah, so let's keep going. Next up is Carnivore. Carnivore, of course, Peter Steele's band before Typo Negative. You couldn't have two different bands than Carnivore and Typo Negative, especially once we get past maybe Bloody Kisses. Slowly But Hard is kind of a bridge album between the Carnivore sound and what would later be Typo's more established sound. Bloody Kisses, I think they're more or less getting it locked in. But yeah, is this an essential thrash album? I don't know. I think back then when it came out, and I did buy it when it was new, this album and Retaliation after it, I don't think I felt this was a really special album. I mean, there were a lot of, not paint by numbers thrash albums, but albums that were just like, I like this, but I feel like it's a flavor of the week too. And I feel like Carnivore's first album is a little bit of that. There's some jokiness in it. I'm okay with the jokiness and whatnot. We get more of that in Typo Negative, obviously, although some people don't get the joke in Typo Negative. Maybe some goths don't. I don't know. But still pretty funny. God is Dead's good song. World War 3 and 4, as they mentioned, is pretty decent as well. So Roadrunner 1986, that's the actual label. Again, we're going to find labels that aren't the original labels. But yeah, also that cover isn't the original cover. That was a reissue cover there in the video right here. So yeah, Carnivore. I'm okay with it. Next up is Darkness Descends from Dark Angel. This is their second album after We Have Arrived. Combat 1986 is correct. Great album. Gene Hoglan, that amazing drumming, the atomic clock, as they call him. Amazing album. What else did they say here about it before doing time test? They just talk about Gene Hoglan. That's interesting. Don Doty still on vocals here. We don't get Ron Reinhardt yet. Some people don't pick this album either as their favorite Dark Angel album or an essential thrash album. And I think there's a real difference sometimes between the two. And we can discuss that because there are some choices later on in this list that I can say, well, this is my second favorite so-and-so album, but it's the essential thrash album in their collection. And I do want to make that distinction. I might make it over and over again. Who knows? But yeah, killer album. Of course, Darkness Descends, great song. Also, The Burning of Sodom, amazing song. And all of that. Again, I think some people are going to pick Leave Scars. I think, quite honestly, I think they're bigger fans of that album. Some might feel that that album is a little more representative of Dark Angel, especially once we get the Time Does Not Heal, which is a more technical album, but I still love that album a lot. In fact, we all know I love that album because they did a whole video on it. You can check my channel for that. But yeah, I largely agree with Darkness Descends. I came in on the band on this album, by the way, when it came out, and I went back for We Have Arrived. So yeah, Merciless Death, great song. Yeah. So yeah, no complaints about Dark Angel here at all. Next up is Death Angel with Frolic Through the Park. I think this is where we're going to get into a little bit of disagreement, I believe. Not the ultra-violence. I don't get that. Maybe the folks at Revolver are expecting more virtuosity or diversity or other things coming into records in order to be more interesting thrash-wise. Yeah, not buying it. Frog to the Park, I think for the time was an interesting album for me. This came out in 1988. It says Restless Records. That's about right. They might have had a bit of a deal with Enigma too. I can't remember. But good album, but not great. It really did fall away from me. Also, I hate the cover song on here. I'm a huge Kiss fan. I hate Cold Gin as a cover song. It just doesn't work. But aside from that, it's okay. Third Floor is fine. Road Mutants is fine. Past that, I started to get a little tired of the record, and it did wear away for me with time. I don't really feel like it's an essential thrash album at all. Again, we need to go back to the ultra-violence. I think that album, when it came out, was very groundbreaking. They were very young. They were all teenagers when they did the record. I don't even know how young Gus Paper was, or Andy Gallion, for hell's sake. Like, they were all just kids when they did the album, and it's an astounding record. Thrashers and Mistress of Pain, great songs, but I'm not buying Frolic Through the Park here at all. I think it's a mistake to put it here. I would rather see the Ultraviolence. Much better album, much more representative of thrash, especially coming into that second wave of thrash. Pretty cool. Don't agree with this album. It's gotta be the first record for me. Next up is Destruction with Eternal Devastation. This is their second album. I had to think because the Sentence of Death is an EP, Infernal Overkill is a full album. Definitely would pick this one. Absolutely. It is my favorite Destruction album. I'll admit the bias there, but also as far as Destruction in the 1980s, this is a deadlock for like quintessential Destruction album of the period of time. There's also German thrash, and German thrash is a bit of a thing in the 1980s. We also have Kreator, whom we're going to talk about later. Also Sodom, whom we're also going to talk about later. But this is an amazing album. I love this album. Curse the Gods. They still end their sets with it. Or they begin them. I can't remember which. I think they end them with Curse the Gods. But great song. It's on this record. Opens this record. This is interesting. Vocal Schmear channeling Bathory's Quorthon. I don't know if I've ever thought of Quorthon when I've heard this Destruction album. That's a pretty interesting assertion right there. Right there. Bathory's Quorthon. I don't know. And yeah, I know people miss Mike a lot on guitar. Since he hasn't been around, what, 2 or 3 years, whatever it's been. I still love Modern Destruction a lot. I do. So no big deal there. Yeah, a good representative of German thrash in the 1980s. Plus Destruction is a great band. And they were really good on this album too. Highly recommended record. Yeah, so there you go. Not much else to say about Destruction. You should already own this record. Next up is Exodus with Bonded by Blood. A guaranteed yes. This has to be on any list of essential thrash. Period. Combat 1985 is correct. Talking about Torrid Records. Maybe we can get into that. I'll just sort of take a look at the text here. Let's see. Yeah, nothing else really. That's all fine. Interesting that, I mean, Paul Bailoff, I mean, this is his one shot. I mean, I think he did a live album with them later on, and I don't think he was on another studio album. I can't think of one. Maybe there's one I'm just forgetting about, but he was kind of a one and done with this band. And it's interesting because Paul Bailoff kind of lives as a legendary status only because of this one album, which is pretty astounding that one album can really do that for anyone. But pretty great album. There was a thing here, was actually... the first to take thrash, whatever. First to take thrash is interesting. So Exodus does predate Metallica in some respects. I mean, there is an 82 demo for Exodus, and there's some earlier material, I believe. I'm not sure. But listen to that 1982 demo. That's not thrash metal at all. So I think a lot of people who make more of the argument that Metallica was kind of the first thrash metal band, minus some of the proto stuff from Venom and some other bands, you could make that case. So who's first? Whatever. This album is a bona fide classic. I mean, you have Piranha, you have the title track, and then there were none. Strike of the Beast, just amazing stuff on here. I did not hear this. This wasn't the first Exodus I heard, and neither was the demo, actually. There was the Combat Tour live video, The Ultimate Revenge came out. It came out maybe, I think it was in April, and this album came out in August. And that's the first time I ever heard Exodus, was in that video. So I was waiting for this album big time. I was really excited about it coming out and all of that, even though the cover is awful. Let's be honest. The two babies, the Siamese twins thing is just freaking awful. And it wasn't the first choice in cover. There's a whole story about that. But yeah, Exodus, Bonded by Blood. This is, yeah, has to be on here. I mean, if I had a top 5, I think Exodus is in there. This is 25 albums, so we're going through quite a bit. So yeah, Exodus, Bonded by Blood, keep it. All right, Flotsam and Jetsam, Doomsday for the Deceiver. I can talk. Metal Blade 1987. That seems right. This is their first album, of course. The big deal is, of course, Jason Newsted's on the album, right? He later went off to Metallica for a while. What else? Priest and Maiden influence is obvious. I don't know about that. I'd have to hear it a little bit more. I'm not sure about that. I think they were very influenced by the first wave of thrash, of course. But man, you got Michael Gilbert on guitar. You've got Eric A.K. on vocals. Definitely bringing some of that power metal sensibility into thrash. I think you could put Flotsam and Jetsam in the same camp as maybe Metal Church, maybe Overkill. There's some other bands too. I know there's another band that's coming up that also reminds me of that. Might be Forbidden. We'll find out. But yeah, and I love the power-laden thrash metal thing in the 80s. I was a big fan of it. And I was a big fan of this record, too. As far as Flot's records go, I might say this is their best record. It's certainly the most memorable one. It's very the most thrash one because starting even with the second record, we start diversifying a bit when we get to When the Storm Comes Down later, even more so. Quattro is its own hot mess, I guess. But this album's a killer. There's some great stuff on it. Iron Tears and Desecrator and all this stuff. Good stuff. I don't know if I disagree with the choice. You know what? Keep it. Would it be on my top 5, 6? I don't know. It might be lower on my list if I were to order these, but I think you still need to really count it. It's a pretty great record. It's a thrash classic in its own right. So yeah, let's keep it. Forbidden Evil. So this is Forbidden's first album. Metal Blade 1988 is wrong. Well, they might have it now, but this is a combat release for sure. Interesting, I mean, right away they mentioned that Rob Flynn was once in this band before they were recorded, and they went off to Machine Head. We're going to hear more about Rob Flynn later, of course. It's an interesting thing to mention. I don't know if it's a really important thing to mention. Paul Bostaff, later Slayer, is probably a little more of a thing. It's a little more relevant to everything here. Yeah, power metal streak again. You're gonna have that with this Russ Anderson's vocals, especially. Killer band, killer debut album. I bought this when it was brand new, and yeah. I am a bit more of a fan of Twisted Into Form, to be honest. I think that's kind of a high watermark for them. And then after that, maybe some diminishing returns. Some, I do think they have their moments after, but yeah. Great album, Chalice of Blood, right? It's right here. It's the official live video of it. Makes sense, because that's the first song you think of when you think of this album. Forbidden Evil, by the way, was the name of the band originally. They just shortened it to Forbidden, but then named their debut album Forbidden Evil. Yeah, kind of like Testament and the Legacy, right? I don't know if there's anything else to say about this otherwise. Yeah, let's keep it. Absolutely, this album. I mean, you could make the Twisted Into Form, choice as well, but there's something about this record that's really just awesome. Russ Anderson is really awesome, let's be honest. So there you go, Forbidden Evil. Next is Kreator, Pleasure to Kill. Bias here. It's my favorite Kreator album. So I am going to put that aside. I really do think this is the album. I think some people might pick Extreme Aggression, depending on when they came in. I don't think people are going to pick Renewal or Endorama, but who knows? this is a really great album. It's a classic German thrash record alongside Eternal Devastation from Destruction, and another one we're going to talk about later. I have an alternate choice for that band when we get to them. But yeah, I mean, Pleasure to Kill, the title track is decent. I think as far as tracks go, if I were to put one right up here as a clip from YouTube, I would definitely pick Riot of Violence. Killer song. I saw them on the Renewal tour. I've seen them on a number of tours, but when I saw them on that one, I actually got to stage dive to Riot of Violence. It was really amazing. I remember I dove, the crowd caught me, and then my buddy tried to do it, and the crowd parted. He just went face full of concrete. It was amazing to watch. I didn't laugh, but it was hard not to at the same time. Good friend. I still know him, all that, but yeah. Interesting. Cannibal Corpse cites him as an influence. That's interesting. I can kind of hear that a little bit. I don't know about this Netflix series, Dark, because I don't watch Netflix. I find Netflix boring. I think it's like 99.9% crap, and you're paying too much for it anyways. There are other streaming services. You know that. Anyways, same year as Master of Puppets, Rain and Blood, Peace Sells, all that stuff. Of course it was. 1986 is an amazing year for thrash metal. Also, not mentioned here is Sacrifice, Torment, and Fire, and all of that. So yeah. Absolutely Pleasure to Kill. But I would be surprised if someone said Extreme Aggression instead. Some people picked that album, but Pleasure to Kill for me is interesting because, I mean, it's after Endless Pain. Endless Pain is more raw. There are a lot more mistakes on it. And then you have the more cleaned up stuff like Terrible Certainty and all of that. But I think Pleasure to Kill is that sweet spot between rawness and ability that I really like, and songwriting as well. Just so many amazing songs. Ripping Corpse is great. It's just Under the Guillotine, just amazing stuff. So I would keep Pleasure to Kill, not just because it's my favorite Kreator album, but because it is an essential thrash record. I remember vividly when it came out. So yeah, and I'm an old man, so I can talk about these things with a little bit of authority, I guess. So the Metal Church, The Dark. This is interesting because this isn't an entirely thrash metal album. They have thrash ties, of course. They have ties to Metallica. As we know, Metallica pretty much talked Elektra Records into signing Metal Church and then took them out on tour, which they mentioned down here on the Master of Puppets tour for Metallica. David Wayne, this was his last album before he came back many, many years later. Major label debut, of course, Elektra Records, as I mentioned, 1986. It's 1986. It's a great year for so much metal. I love this album a lot. It is my favorite Metal Church album. But I'm not sure about a thrash essential. That it seems a little weird. I would almost say the first album maybe qualifies a little bit more, but there's stuff on here that's pretty thrashy too. I don't know if The Dark really qualifies. A Ton of Bricks is decent. Start the Fire in that realm, but you get stuff like Watch the Children Pray, which isn't really thrash, or maybe it's their version of Sanitarium. You know, it starts out ballady and then kind of gets crazy afterwards. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think about Metal Church The Dark as a choice. I don't know. I'm on the fence about it, to be honest. But it's a great record. Again, it's my favorite Metal Church album. And again, this is another one of those times where I'm going to separate my favorite album from a band and their relevance to thrash. Because those can be two different answers. Let's see what we got here. Of course, Master of Puppets, 1986. Like, I'm not going to say that a zillion times in this thing. Elektra Records, of course, is right. What can be said? Cliff Burton's final album with Metallica. Rest in peace, Cliff Burton, of course. I remember hearing this album. This was not my first Metallica album. My first was Ride the Lightning. Then I went back for Kill 'Em All, and then got this one many months later. I actually remember being at a record store in Reno, Nevada. It was the Warehouse, for those who remember that chain of record stores, WHERE House, Warehouse. I literally remember standing over the guy who was opening the very first box of vinyl of Master of Puppets, just hanging over him going, come on, hurry up. Yeah, he probably didn't like me very much, but F him. So I grabbed the record, and I grabbed a tape too, because I remembered that my mom had a turntable but didn't have a tape deck hooked to it. So I had to tape it because I had a boombox I brought with me. This is all in Reno, Nevada, again, when I was out there finishing off high school, because I was kicked out of my high school in Worcester, as we all know, for being a behavioral problem. Good times. But yeah, so more story than you probably needed, honestly. But yeah, Master Puppets, amazing album. It is my second favorite Metallica album, but it also is a really quintessential thrash record. Maybe more than Ride the Lightning. You can have that fight in the comments, but Yeah, it's hard to deny the importance of this record of thrash metal. It just isn't. And yes, Metallica is a thrash metal band in the 1980s. You can make the case Black Album and on that they aren't, but come on, the 80s, they're thrash. Next up is a dropped graphic. That's pretty funny. But I see Capitol, I see 1986, and I see Dave Mustaine mentioned. So let's call this Peace Sells, but who's buying? Of course, 1986, Capitol Records is correct. Major label deal for Megadeth right after Metallica got one a year later. That's kind of funny. What to say about Peace Sells? Amazing record. This was my first Megadeth album. Technically, the first one I bought, my buddy Eric had Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. I taped it off of him. I really didn't like it at all. In fact, I was just like, this is sloppy. The songwriting isn't there for me. It took Peace Sells to get me into Megadeth. And then I went back for Killing. And then it took me a number of years. I really appreciate the album more in later life, but really didn't back in the 80s at all. So I hardly ever listened to it back then, to be honest. I listened to So Far So Good So What More, which is maybe saying something. I don't even know. But killer album. I mean, what do you got? Wake Up Dead. Amazing way to start a record. You got Peace Sells, of course. Decent song. Also The Conjuring, My Last Words. Just amazing stuff. I could do without the cover tune on there. I ain't superstitious. I think that brings the record down a touch for me, but not too much because the rest of it's pretty great. Interesting here it says pointed politics. That's fascinating because outside of some lines out of Peace Sells, find me the other political song, because Wake Up Dead is about infidelity. The Conjuring is clearly like black magic. And I mean, it goes on and on. My Last Words isn't political. None of them are. I mean, realistically, Black Friday, sorry, it's not a highly political record. So it's weird to see that here. I feel like you listened to one song and thought the whole record was that. I don't know. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, it's killer record. Rest in peace, Gar Samuelson, by the way. Yeah. No arguments. Peace Sells. Interesting they didn't pick Rust in Peace. They could have very easily, but they didn't. So there we go. Next up is Nuclear Assault with Survive. Another bias. It's my favorite Nuclear Assault album. And I think Nuclear Assault should be here. It's interesting. It says MCA. Of course, the album was originally on IRS. A very weird inclusion for IRS. Nuclear Assault. There are a bunch of odd bands on IRS that don't go together at all. I think, what was that band? Seduce was on IRS. There were some other bands too. Alternative bands, early alternative bands and stuff. So it was an odd label to be on. What else did I want to say to this? And I think before that they were on Combat Records, if I'm not mistaken. Interesting you mentioned the S.O.D influence. I mean, Danny Lilker's in both bands. So, okay, there's an S.O.D influence. Really hated the Zeppelin cover, Good Times, Bad Times. It's the skippable track, big time. Randy Burns produced. Some people don't know that. That's kind of interesting. But other than that, great stuff. I would consider this a crossover thrash album in a lot of ways. I love this album. I love Game Over and the 2 EPs before this as well. And I am a big fan of Out of Order as well as Handled with Care going before that. Once we get to something wicked, I kind of check out, to be honest. But Survive right in the middle of all of this is really fantastic. I didn't see this tour. I saw the Handled with Care tour after it. But great record. Great record. Survive. Played it over and over as a kid. I remember my buddy Tom had this in his car stereo. We played it over and over again. It's a great record. And Nuclear Assault, no longer around. They broke up in 2022, or they retired, as they say. But I don't know. Hopefully they come back. I don't know. Play the oldies for us, I guess. Anything else to say about this? Yeah, Anthrax, right. And all that, the connection. Yeah, nothing else. So Nuclear Assault, leave them. Absolutely. And that record specifically. All right, Overkill, The Years of Decay. So this is my second favorite Overkill album. My first is Feel the Fire. I've talked about that before. And I would probably put Horoscope at 3. Interesting that they didn't pick Horoscope, because when I think of a quintessential thrash album, and specifically Overkill, immediately the Horoscope comes to mind. It was a very impactful album. Everyone loves Horoscope. I mean, they did a live record on it, you know. I mean, they did one on Feel the Fire as well, too. So, you know, the Overhausen set there. Megaforce 1989 is correct. I don't think they ever got signed over to purely Atlantic Records. I know there was a deal between Megaforce and Atlantic back then. Maybe they did. I have to look at Horoscope to see that, or later. But yeah. Quintessential thrash album. So, despite how I feel about this album, I love this album. This is kind of a dead second place for me, because I love this album a lot. But again, even they're mentioning this like 10-minute playing with Spider's Skull Crusher, not really thrash. And there's some stuff that's kind of not really thrash. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with not being entirely thrash. But if we're going to put it on an essential thrash metal list, you should be closest to the mark. And I think Horoscope is more that record. If you want to go classic, you could go Feel the Fire. It's my favorite. I would say maybe do that, but I understand Horoscope more as the choice here. Terry Date produced. I think he produced Horoscope as well. I can't remember. It's a great record. The last with Bobby Gustafson. Unfortunately, he went on to Cycle Sluts from Hell and some other things, I'm sure, before doing Violence for 5 seconds. Right. Great record. Great. I can't complain about Elimination. Great song. Time to Kill. Great stuff. Evil Never Dies as an ender is really great as well. So yeah, Overkill, The Years of Decay. Got to go with Horoscope. I think that should have been here instead of The Years of Decay. But again, great record. And again, let's point out the difference. I could have a really great record and it not be an essential thrash metal album. There you go. Next up is Possessed with Seven Churches. This is their debut album. It says Century Media. It was originally on Combat, I think. Yeah, it's a Combat. They were on Combat originally. Yeah, I mean, it mentions the fact that they could eventually be considered thrash and influential in black metal and stuff like that, or they should mention that. Are they not mentioning that? No, proto-black metalists, they are. It's a death thrash album. I mean, if you want to get purely death metal, a lot closer to the mark is Scream Bloody Gore from Death, but I still contend this is the first death metal album, at least in the death metal camp. They even have a song called Death Metal on here, which isn't always the mark of whatever. I mean, Venom had black metal, and that doesn't sound like, black metal from the 90s on and all that. But, again, genres, they were so fluid. They moved in and out, and no one knew really what they meant half the time in the 80s. So I'm one of those people who probably made those mistakes with those labels. We might talk about that a little bit later. I think there's something else up here that reminded me of it. But I love the lo-fi production values. It's funny that it says values, considering I don't know if it was really a choice. I don't think Possessed sat down and said, let's make it sound really bad, which it did, of course. But sometimes you're dealt the hand you're given with production. On in your band, you're just starting out. You don't have the money and all that stuff. So. Unless they really did intend it. If Jeff Becerra's out there, he could tell me. He watches my channel every once in a while. But great record. I didn't really gravitate to it. I did buy this record. I didn't listen to it a lot. I wasn't really grabbed by it at first. I was a Beyond the Gates guy all the way. Beyond the Gates is still my favorite Possessed album. I think The Eyes of Horror fell away from me over time. It's just a little too clean, a little too... the songwriting isn't there for me as much. I think Beyond the Gates is kind of the sweet spot between those two. But in later years, I did start listening more to Seven Churches, and I really like this album a lot. Like a lot. So I wish I had appreciated it more as a teenager. But I did like it still. I mean, I liked Venom, I liked Bathory, and we're kind of talking about those two bands down below. Obviously, those bands were very influential on anything remotely black metal, even death metal and thrash metal. We all know that. Especially Venom. Especially with the thrash thing, Bathory more, death metal, black metal stuff. Yes, Larry Lalonde was later in Primus. He was in a band before that, in between the two. He was on one record for Blind Illusion. It was The Sane Asylum. Great record. Blind Illusion's still around to this day. Fighting the good fight, if you will. The Sane Asylum is an amazing record. I know I played the crap out of it. Both my buddies, Tom and Eric, were very much listening to it as well. So, yeah, you should check that out. The Sane Asylum by Blind Illusion. If you want to hear Larry Lalonde, you can hear hints of what he's later going to do in Primus, because his playing has always been a little off-kilter and weird and chaotic. So, yeah, I mean, he doesn't stop doing that just because he leaves this band, obviously. Anyways, Possessed Seven Churches, yes, even though it's not my favorite Possessed album, it's a hugely important record for thrash and death metal, and I would leave it on here. Absolutely. You have to have the list. You have to have it on the list. Next up, Sacred Reich, Ignorance. This is their first album. Metal Blade is right, 1987. Is 87 right? Yeah. So Phoenix, they're from Phoenix, just like Flotsam and Jetsam. Very political band, hugely political. I tend to think that Sacred Reich, I think they didn't start politics and thrash metal, but they were pretty early on. They were pretty insistent upon it. And I think a lot of other bands did a lot more political stuff after this album came out. I tend to think that that was kind of an influence in that regard. Pioneers of metalcore, back when metalcore meant something very different than it means now. And metalcore's, it's weird to compare a band like Sacred Reich to bands of modern note that are metalcore. But I get it. Not much else to say about this record. I did buy this record. This is probably my favorite Sacred Reich album. If I only had one Sacred Reich album, I would just have this one and maybe that's it. But I don't know. I kind of like The American Way a little. I think some of the tracks don't hold up on that one as much over time. But yeah, Sacred Reich, Ignorance. Again, pretty much crossover in a lot of ways. And I think crossover thrash is a really important subgenre of thrash. I might talk a little bit more about that probably in my conclusion, everything, because I've got some things to say about bands that weren't mentioned here. But yeah, so anyway, Sacred Reich, Ignorance. Yeah, keep it. Sanctuary, Refuge Denied. So this is their first album. Epic Records, 1987 is right. Dave Mustaine had his hand in everything here. I feel like he practically discovered this band. He did produce the record. He took them out on tour. Funny thing about that, I saw this tour. Warlock was on the bill as well. And Megadeth were awful. Like they were sloppy. Clearly the Daves were drugging hard. Sanctuary blew all the other two bands off the stage. I mean, Warl Dane's pitch perfect voice live was just incredible. Before this show, the only song I had heard was Die for My Sins. I taped it off college radio when I was out west before I came back to the East Coast. And so I was going on one song. And I remember after the show, the next day, I'm like, we're going to Strawberries. We're buying this goddamn album. They were amazing. Blown away. And it's one of those bands you see live, you immediately have to buy their stuff. So yeah. It's interesting that they talk about them as Warl and Jim's pre-Nevermore band, because obviously Nevermore is the bigger known band, which is interesting. I mean, Nevermore has their fans and all that stuff. I think they're fine. But I guess I came in on Sanctuary early, so Sanctuary to me is a big deal, maybe a bigger deal. Maybe that's my age or where I'm coming from, but yeah. Layered vocals that Dane has yet to match. I don't know. I think Into the Mirror Black had some pretty amazing vocals on it. Yeah, go listen to Future Tense. Go listen to Taste Revenge. I mean, there's some great stuff on that second record. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. They're from Seattle. Similar to Metal Church. Metal Church was kind of outside of Seattle, if I remember correctly. But yeah, and Queensryche, of course, also Seattle. And not just for grunge. Yeah, right. So yeah, great record, but let's talk about its inclusion on this list here because it's not a thrash record. I think it was very in the thrash neighborhood back then, and it made sense that they toured with Megadeth, but see, they got also toured with Warlock, so that kind of tells you something as well. I wouldn't put on this list, even though I love this album a lot, like a lot. Like I could spin this record for days. But essential thrash record, specifically thrash, I need to leave this one out because it's just not true to that at all. I think there's a lot more traditional metal and power metal going on. Great record. Again, I feel like I keep having to say that because I know some of the comments is like, dude, I love Sanctuary. They're awesome. And like, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying they don't fit on this essential thrash list. Very specifically, essential and thrash. Let's not repeat things. Let's move on. All right, Sepultura, Arise. So this is an interesting choice because I really feel it's somewhere between this album and Beneath the Remains because I don't know if I could choose because they're both really good albums. Roadrunner 1991 is correct. Interesting. Let's see. I'm just looking at this. So Dead Embryonic Cells, Desperate Cry, Arise. There was a video for Dead Embryonic Cells as well, but Arise is one too. I came in on Beneath the Remains, so I was ready for this band by the time Arise came out. This is probably, I got to commit to it being my favorite Sepultura album because Beneath the Remains is right there too, going Inner Self, Beneath the Remains. knocking on that door that exists for some reason. Um, yeah, yeah. I would include this record for sure. I got this record when it was new and during college radio. Played the crap out of this record and the singles, the B sides of the singles, and all that that weren't on this record. Yeah, there's no argument. Sepultura. I mean, later, I thought KSAD was okay, but then after that, Roots, I'm out. So yeah, I mean, this is a classic era Sepultura. It's also early '90s thrash, which was taking on kind of new shapes and all of that, but still staying aggressive and trying to keep up with death metal at the same time, which I think Sepultura kind of did. I think they did a good job of that. Everything kind of died off a couple of years later, a few years later, and kind of death metal really took over. Then death metal had their own little bit of a hiatus, not too much, while black metal kind of took over. We all know the history. I don't need to go through it, but yeah, Sepultura Rise, keep it, absolutely. Great album. Slayer, Rain and Blood. So a lot of people are going to pick this album, right? I mean, it's a highly memorable record. American, 1986. So American records used to be Def American, and before that they were Def Jam. So this record came out, it was on Def Jam Records, which was otherwise a hip-hop label. Those might remember the Beastie Boys, and who else was on that label? I can't remember. Other hip-hop artists were on that label. New face of speed metal. I love that they say that because, let me get out of that. I can highlight things. Slayer was considered speed metal in the very beginning. I remember that term being bandied about, as many subgenre terms were. I mean, Metallica called themselves power metal, right? So, labels got abused a little bit and people didn't quite know what they were doing with them. But that is true. Speed metal. I remember I came in on, I came in before Hell Awaits. So High in the Chapel was the newest album or EP at the time. And I love Hell Awaits a lot. There's a little bit of fight in me between Rain and Blood and Hell Awaits, my favorite. I would probably say Hell Awaits now. But if you ask me 1986, I would tell you that Rain and Blood is the most amazing thing ever. I did see this tour. Overkill opened. My ears rang for 7 days because I was about this far from Kerry King's amp, pretty much. It's an amazing record. And I remember the first time I just put that needle in the groove because I had not heard any of it before buying it. I blind bought it. I remember just being blown away going, wow, what is this? And I probably hadn't had that feeling since I heard Ride the Lightning in '84, but it's a pretty amazing album. I mean, it's very fast. It's very brutal thrash almost for its time. I mean, it's just incredible. Production, but it's fine. And it's only 28 minutes long. I think the most amazing thing about Rain and Blood is that it's a pretty dense 28 minutes. Like, I don't feel like I'm getting cheated out of time or songs or whatever by hearing it. By the time we're at the end of it, I feel like I got a full course meal, maybe. I don't even know. But yeah, it's a pretty great record. It is a classic. It would probably be in the top 5. Absolutely. Even though I might love Hell Awaits a little bit more now. It doesn't matter, because Hell Awaits is not an essential thrash album. Hell Awaits is a really good metal album with elements of speed and some thrash and some other things. They still have a little bit of that Judas Priest riffiness going on on Hell Awaits. Not so much on Rain and Blood. Rain and Blood, I really think hardcore kind of caught their ears a lot at this moment and period in time. I know Lombardo is a big fan, and I think Hanneman as well. But yeah, anyways, Rain and Blood, Slayer has to be on this list. It could very well be at the top of the list in a lot of ways, if this were to be an ordered list. So yeah, no arguments. Next up is Sodom with Agent Orange, and I think Sodom should be on the list. They're definitely one of the Teutonic 3, because I refuse to put Tankard on any list of Teutonic thrash. I just do. And I've gone into that argument before. But Agent Orange is a good album. I think I would have picked Persecution Mania instead. Or if I was going to be real purist, I mean, I could go back to the earlier stuff. But yeah, I think Agent Orange is a good record. And I think you do need Sodom on this list in general. I think for Teutonic thrash. There is no Tankard on this list, by the way, because they are not essential. But the other 3 are. So it kind of works out that way. Yep, the record's about the Vietnam War and all that stuff. Is there anything? Tom Angel Ripper, one of the greatest names in metal, next to Tom G. Warrior. Yeah, I would say include them. Am I really excited about Sodom? I'm okay with them. I really love the modern stuff a lot. Like I think Decision Day and Genesis 19 are great records, and I know they got some newer stuff coming up. That 1982 EP was really fantastic. I did buy it. So I'm slowly easing more into Sodom than I would have in the 80s. But still, Persecution Mania would probably be my choice instead of Agent Orange. So there you go. And it is time for a beverage here because my throat is going. Pulling a Darcy here. All right, S.O.D, Speak English or Die. First and foremost, no one called them Stormtroopers of Death. It was always S.O.D. Megaforce, 1985, all of that's correct. I believe it was the summer of 85 because it was near my birthday in August. Anthrax side project, I guess you could say that. 2 current members, 1 ex-member, and then Billy Milano. No one knew the hell who he was. Right. Where did Billy Milano come from? We don't know. I'm sure someone will look up Metal Archives and find out where he came from, but let's be honest. He was a complete stranger. Left Field Underground hit. First time I heard that riff, that March of the S.O.D, like that riff immediately grabbed me. Played this album countless times when I was a kid. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Still love it to this day. It is a thrash classic. It's one of the earliest crossover thrash metal albums I know about. There are probably earlier ones, maybe, but this is really the quintessential one, especially for its time period. Scott Ian is amazing on it as well. 21 ruthlessly short, relentlessly amusing songs. That's about right. 21 tracks. I don't even think of it as having 21 tracks. I mean, that's pretty amazing. We know they're short too. Most of them are. I think Freddy Krueger isn't as much, and that first song isn't as much. But yeah, what to say about S.O.D? Bought in 85. This was before Spreading the Disease, I think, but after Armed and Dangerous for Anthrax. I can't remember. But yeah, pretty amazing record. We thought they'd be a one and done band. We really did, because M.O.D happened. Billy Milano went to that in 87, 88, whenever, 87. I can't remember what year. I think it was 87. But yeah, so there you go. S.O.D, Speak English or Die. There's an album title for the modern age there. Oof. All right, so another missing graphic, but I can see Epic 1988 and How I Laugh. So we're talking about suicidal tendencies. The album is How I Laugh Tomorrow When I Can't Even Smile Today. Great album title. Mike Muir, Suicidal. So Suicidal's an interesting band because they kind of started out as a hardcore band on their first album, that self-titled album. Then they joined the Army. They got a little more metal. And then this album is thrashy, along with the next record, Lights, Camera, Revolution, which I think is a little more mainstream. There's a little bit of a sweet spot with this album. It's thrashy, but I don't know if it's really essential. In fact, I don't know if Suicidal Tendencies is an essential thrash metal band. I'm not convinced of it. I like this album. I like this band, but there's so much other stuff going on too, especially later with the funk stuff, and Mike kind of raps too. And I don't know. I'm just not really buying it. Again, great album. I think I like this album more than Lights, Camera, Revolution, quite a bit more. I think Trip at the Brain is a great song, but I'm just not really essential thrash. Like I keep coming back to that word essential. I just don't think this one makes it, but good album. You should check it out. All right. I love video not available. Hilarious. So Testament, The New Order. This is their second album. Megaforce 1988 is correct. A lot of people are going to say this album or The Legacy. The Legacy is their first album. And it's a fair fight. I mean, it really is. I feel that probably The Legacy is a little more groundbreaking. I think it ushers in a lot of the second wave thrash metal in general. I think New Order is great. It's a little more polished. It's a little more, whatever in that regard. It's more of a mainstream release in a lot of ways. Still great. I mean, Disciples of the Watch, great song. It's probably my favorite song on there. Trial by Fire is great. Oh boy, my throat's going. Woo. Yeah, so I would probably say The Legacy instead of The New Order. Even though I love The New Order, it might be my favorite Testament album. Not sure. Because as I get older, I really do think about more the roots of bands, and I think The Legacy is such a great album. I think I might be sliding towards that a little bit for favorite Testament, but I'm not sure. And I do love the modern stuff too. In fact, I will be wanting to hear that new album whenever the hell it comes out. So there you go. Did they say anything else about it? Carrying on the work of Metallica and Exodus. That's right, of course, because they were the first wave of thrash metal. Skolnick's playing, of course, is just amazing. It's weird to think about, like, let's have a thrash band and then toss this like Steve Vai type guy in there to do all over the place. It's pretty cool. I mean, he was doing it on the first record too. I mean, fire up Apocalyptic City, you can hear it. But yeah, the New Order, great record. Trial by Fire was in there. They did a cover tune of Aerosmith's Nobody's Fault on this album, which is okay. I mean, they do try to make it sound like their own song. And I think to some degree they succeed. So I'm not totally against this cover tune, but I don't know. Every time a cover tune comes up, and they come up a lot on 80s thrash records, believe it or not, I'm not always on board. But for this one, I'm fine. Nothing else really to say about it. Into the Pit, also a good song. I just see it listed there. So yeah. And the video was probably for Trial by Fire. That's my guess, is what this probably was before it was unavailable. So yeah, let's move on. Violence. That brings me back. Eternal Nightmare, their first album, with that amazing Ed Repka art right there. Mechanics, 1988. Mechanic. This is not a Megadeth song. Mechanic Records, interesting. I'm trying to think of who else is on there. Bang Tango was on Mechanic. I don't know why I know that. Interesting label. Of course, they're going to talk about Machine Head, Rob Flynn, Phil Demmel. Funny thing is, I'm not really a Machine Head fan at all, but I'm a big fan of this record and the next one too, Oppressing the Masses, and the Torture Tactics EP, of course. So I think of those two guys more as being Violence members rather than in their respective bands. Phil Demmel, of course, now is in Category 7 with John Bush, but is that a project? Is that an ongoing band? We don't know. But this is a killer album. And what's really funny is in this paragraph, I see zero mention of Sean Killian's vocals, which are worthy of note. Like, let's be honest. I mean, Sean Killian singing makes or breaks it with some people. I think many people are fine with it. I'm amazing with it. I love his weird staccato, accenty vocal stuff he does. I love that style. It's very unique and thrash, especially for the 1980s. And I was pretty excited to hear it because I was like, wow, this is different, but it fits the music. Novel progressive arrangements, it says here. Yeah, to some degree. I don't think this is too proggy of a record. It's pretty brutal in a lot of ways. I mean, it earns its name of Violence. It's the name of the band. Serial Killer, great song. Calling in the Corner, really great song. Calling in the Corner. I don't know. Are they still around? I don't know. But when they were kind of sort of still around, might still be, we don't know. That was always in their set list, Calling in the Corner. My favorite song on this album is Phobophobia. Great song, but I will take Serial Killer and Calling in the Corner. Bodies on Bodies. Oh my God. Amazing stuff. Barrier Thrash definitely came with the second wave. Amazing band. I can't say enough about this record. Oppressing the Masses is decent too. I think Sean tries to branch out a little bit with his voice. He doesn't stick strictly with that staccato thing. He varies a little bit more shouty. Stuff happens on Oppressing the Masses, but still great record. Officer Nice, great song. But it's interesting here. This is interesting. Traditionalist thrash. I don't really hear much that's traditional about Violence. Violence was kind of a unique little band. They're thrash, I mean, for sure. I mean, they're not trying to bring in everything in the kitchen sink, into the music or anything like that. But I always thought Violence had a bit of their own thing. More than this kind of gives them credit for it. Traditionalists. Yeah. Not as traditional, I would say. Nothing cookie cutter going on with this band at all. I don't think. You can argue with me in the comments if you like. But yeah. Anyways, let's stop talking about Violence. Eternal Nightmare, you should own this record. It is amazing. OG copies of it on vinyl. Jesus. My wallet isn't that deep. So there we go. Voivod, Dimension Hatros. Everyone had a different way to pronounce those. I've heard Hatros, 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 Hatros. Kind of think. Umlauts make it Tross, like Motley Crue. Right. And I don't see a line over the A, so I'm going to go with hat, not hate. But you want to say hate, right? Because hate. Hate. Anyways, Noise Records 1988 is, of course, correct. This is my favorite Voivod album. But I do love War and Pain a lot for very different reasons. This band went through some changes in general throughout their years. Still around, by the way. I love the Canadian weirdos Voivod. I feel like Popoff came up with that. Did he write that? Did you, Martin? You should let me know, because I love just calling them Canadian weirdos. It kind of fits, right? I guess this is a kind of a concept album. What does it say? Transformation from their speed metal early days to something more singular and compelling. So yeah, the progginess is really starting to come in at this point. It's still very thrashy though. It still hangs on to that. Once we get to Nothing Face, a lot of the thrash disappears. It gets the record's a little cleaner. It's a little proggier. It's a little more experimental in some ways. By the time we get to Angel Rat and on, they go full tilt prog rock and some other stuff. There's some alternative too in the 90s catalog. But this is a great album. What do we got? Psychic Vacuum. That's another one. Tribal Convictions, great song. There's some amazing stuff on here. I think some people will either pick this record or Killing Technology, because Killing Technology really has its fans too, because by the time we get to Killing, there's still a lot of, the thrash is still there as well, but it's a bit more raw than Dimension, like a bit more in some level. I mean, they kind of clean up as they go. Though I think that's their charm on War and Pain. And I've never really liked Roar. I think I went through this in a video before. Maybe one day I will, but I just don't. Roar's their second album. War and Pain's their first, in case you need the chronology there. So yeah, Voivod absolutely should be here. Tribal Convictions is here, right there. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, keep them. Absolutely keep them. And that's it. That went so quick. So it's hard not to notice that these are all old albums, and to be fair, they did state that they're covering classic bands, but it might have been decent to list albums after 1991, because there was certainly a revival of the genre in our current century, with bands like Power Trip, Municipal Waste, and Enforced, to name a few. Despite Revolver's assertion here, thrash didn't die in the early 90s, it just took a little nap. Also, yes, I know Doomsday for the Deceiver came out in 1986, I just wasn't paying that much attention at that moment to the typo on screen. I mean, I know when it came out, I bought it back then and all of that. I mean, hell, Newstead was already in Metallica in late 1986, so 87 for the album just doesn't make sense. Just stating that to avoid any confusion in the comments, because I know there'll be some. And I know that if you're making a list limited to 25 releases, you have to trim the fat, but it might have been nice to see some additional bands here. Coroner, perhaps, and maybe with Punishment for Decadence, great album. Also, and maybe this is pushing things a little, but I wouldn't have minded Heavy Metal Maniac from Exciter here, because if you're going to include Metal Church and Sanctuary, you might as well let Exciter in as well. And I will toss in a record that I feel got sorely overlooked in the early 90s thrash scene, but is utterly amazing, and that would be Idolatry by Devastation. A little death thrash to some degree, but leaning more into the thrash. You should definitely check that album out when you have the chance. Of course, I'm sure that you have your own list of essential thrash albums, perhaps including many of these. You should let me know which ones you agree with, which ones you'd drop, and which ones you'd include that aren't on this list here. Let me know that and anything else having to do with the subject at hand, including any articles you might like to see me react to next. That'd be pretty cool. Put that all in the comments below. And if this is your first time on my channel, just so you know, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting, but also classic and modern metal in general. If you like this video that you just watched, feel free to give it a like. Also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. And of course, I always appreciate when people share out my videos to their friends on social media. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.